If I were to ask you to recite the Ten Commandments, you'd probably come up with a fairly accurate list. You might mix up one or two along the way, but I'll bet you could do it without too much difficulty. So, what is the first commandment? No, not the one about not worshiping other gods, but the very first command that Moses gave the people. We heard it today in the first reading. It was a single word: listen. It's not actually one of the famous 10, but it is the first thing that Moses said to the Israelites as he gave them the commandments. Listen. And if you were listening closely, you heard it repeated several times in the readings today. From Moses, hear, O people. From Jesus, hear me, all of you, and understand. The Word of God today is trying to get our attention, so listen up. If you're looking for laws, rules, and regulations, the Bible's the place to find them. There are hundreds of them, just in the first few books, and dozens more scattered throughout. The Ten Commandments are only part of the story, you know. From the very start, it sounds like God is all about rules and regulations. You may eat of the fruit of any of the trees in the garden, except for the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Of this tree you shall not eat. There are laws about eating and not eating, rules about prayers, fasts, and sacrifices. There are regulations about marriage and how to be a good parent and how to be a good child. There are hundreds of them, too many to count. The bar was set pretty high when it came to following the laws of God. Who could possibly keep track of all that? Well, the Pharisees could, or they thought they could anyway. For the Pharisees, holiness was an easy thing to measure. For them, it was a matter of how good are you at keeping the rules? As we hear in the gospel today, they thought, the Pharisees did, that Jesus and his disciples weren't very good at it at all, and therefore they weren't holy, not even close. Why do your disciples not follow the traditions of our elders? In other words, how can you claim to be speaking for the Lord when you don't keep the rules? Who do you think you are? The Pharisees asked Jesus. Specifically, the occasion of their question is about washing your hands before you eat. Please know that they weren't talking about personal hygiene here. That was a given, I hope. What they were talking about and challenging Jesus on was a ritual action, a religious thing that had been passed down for many generations. It's not even in the Bible, this hand-washing thing, even with all the rules and commandments that are already there. It was part of the oral law that had been handed on from one generation to the next. It had become yet another thing that everyone was supposed to do if they wanted to be holy. Jesus' response to the Pharisees is quick and to the point. Hypocrites. That word is harsh. They're fakers, pretenders, actors. The Pharisees were not what they appeared to be. They were wearing masks of holiness. As is usually the case, we don't get to hear how the Pharisees reacted to this criticism, and with good reason. Jesus doesn't want to talk about them. He wants to talk about us, those who would be his disciples. Clearly, being a follower of Jesus means being holy, or at least trying to be. Holiness is an excellent goal, and there's some really good news about it today in the Word of God. You know what Jesus tells us about being holy? Listen. God is not keeping score about how many of the rules and regulations you kept. It's not about keeping the rules. It's simply this: humbly welcome the word that has been planted in you. Or in other words, listen.